Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the International House. I'm Professor Ksenia Smutin, and I'm Director of the IAS. Well, Christmas is, of course, the most interdisciplinary time of the year, in my opinion. Economists model it, engineers trying to optimize it, sociologists contextualize it, philosophers interpret it, and physicists are trying to work out how Santa achieves faster than light travel. So I'd say this fits right in with what we're trying to do at the IAS. 2025 has been fantastic for us. We've hosted the largest number of residential fellows we've ever had. We have more applications from our colleagues at Loughborough than we've ever had. And it's just really wonderful to see so much engagement and so much interest. We also have appointed new members of our advisory board. I will introduce them after the lecture today. And it's wonderful again to have so much interest and support. And we wanted to celebrate all of this with a new tradition, and that is the Christmas IAS lectures. The idea is not mine or ours. It was actually Liz Stocco who suggested it a couple of years ago, I think when it was the IAS open house, and she said, why don't we have an IAS Christmas lecture? So here we are having IAS Christmas lecture. And we hope that this IAS Christmas lectures will really become a new tradition that will blend the spirit of the season with the curiosity and imagination that are so important for interdisciplinary research. The IAS is the space that is powered by ideas, by debates, by learning, by curiosity, but also by fun. And I'm so excited that our very first Christmas lecture is delivered by the person who encompasses this whole and learning. And this is Professor Marsha Meskimmon, the former director of IAS, who kind of made this all really happen for us. And it's wonderful to have you here today. Marsha's research moves disciplinary boundaries. It goes beyond and above disciplines, which of course is at the heart of the IAS. Marsha's talk, From the Star of Bethlehem to a Cool Yule, I'm very intrigued by this title, is something we've been really looking forward to for quite a few months now. I think it's been it was in June that you've agreed, you were volunteered to do this talk. So I'm sure we will all enjoy it. And please stay with us after the lecture. We will have carols, we will have Christmas crafts. We will also, I hope, have some mince pies. That's what I came here for, at least. So please enjoy. Marsha, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I have to say, this is the first time that I have ever done a festive lecture. So I'm really looking forward to this, for my own part as well. And it's always a delight to be at the IAS. It's always a delight to see old colleagues and new. It is a most exciting space. It remains an incredibly exciting space. I tune in periodically to the website. I tune in to some of the talks, and I am so amazed by what a fantastic a job everybody does and how incredibly professional and beautiful and wonderful it is. So it always makes me feel heartened. It's that sort of thing where you revisit an old ground and you think, wow, it's even better, even bigger, even more amazing than it ever was when I was here. So it's just great to be here today. And I thank you for this. Now, I've been introduced as being fun. We'll have a go. I'll do my best at a bit of fun. It's a mixed bag. I'm thinking of this as Santa's satchel. I basically have some crazy photographs. I have a little bit of holiday snaps. I have a little bit of family. I have a little bit of Christmas and my own kind of sense of Christmas. I have a little bit of kind of history. I have always a little bit of feminism. I've got plenty of art and a variety of other things. I think it sort of goes together somehow. But here's, well, that's up to you. I'm starting quite straightforwardly on this. Star of Bethlehem to a cool Yule. Christmas really does come but once a year. And this photo is actually mine. And I never take a good photo, but it's really hard to take a bad photo of Copenhagen market kind of in the middle of kind of setting up for the festive season. And so here you have Hogebro Platz with Abel Skriva and glögg and Danish flag ornaments and lots of lights. So there's a market and lots of lights. And I think this will help us get started. So when we think about this notion of Christmas and Christmas spirit and holiday times and whatever. I think I have had in my life two really wonderful experiences of being able to have sort of a run up to the festive season and indeed to enjoy the festive season in Scandinavia. And this is where so I want to start first with something that is geographically located. So here's Copenhagen. I had Copenhagen described to me by a Swedish friend who came to stay in Copenhagen while I was there. I've been there for the past 3 months. I am a guest professor at the University of Copenhagen over the course of this year. And so I've been resident for the last 3 months watching Yule start up. And I'll be back again in the springtime. I had the city described to me, I think, in the most interesting way by a Swedish person who came and said, what she really enjoys about Copenhagen is the fact that it's very much a Scandinavian city. And there are a range of things that I'll talk about in a moment about that Scandinavian city. It's certainly a Scandinavian. She feels totally at home. It's very easy for a Swede to be there, but it is also continental. And I think that really does have a lot to do with the nature of this space and the way in which it operates. It also has a lot to do with what I want to talk about in relation to the notion of a cool Yule in a moment. So let's just look at a little bit of Copenhagen getting ready for the festive season. That's Tivoli Gardens, the second oldest amusement park in the world, completely lit. You can see it. It begins, it was already when I left for this season at the end of November, it was already getting dark by 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And of course, the place begins to light like crazy. And tree lights, of course. This is one of my photographs. The square that where I had my flat, which is Kongens Nytorv, a major square, lit up in the middle of November. This is the Hotel d'Angleterre. So obviously the English hotel, the 19th century English hotel, which was also the site of the Nazi headquarters when Denmark was occupied. And we will talk a little bit about something like that shortly. But unbelievable decorations emerge. They really are very beautiful. The square also was like magically transformed in about 3 days flat into a full-scale ice skating rink with, and of course, this is again very much the sort of Scandinavian experience. I kind of looked at it and thought, oh, that might be interesting or whatever. I mean, everybody knows how to skate. I mean, there's no fooling here. I was like, yeah, I'm not going on that ice skating rink because all I do is sort of like flail around and fall down, and everybody is whizzing around enjoying the Yule. And I'm like, okay, that's not my space, but okay, I like it. But it's quite fantastic. But it's also very much in the spirit of Denmark. They have a ministry for Yule. There's no fooling around about how you're going to organize Christmas. If you're going to organize Christmas, you set up a ministry, you get it going, it works. It is not happenstance and whatever. And these trucks showed up everywhere. This is again my square. These trucks showed up all over the city, and they put up greenery, and they put up lights, and they put up ice skating rinks, and they put up small buildings, and they put up places to make glögg, and they just put up all this stuff, and the whole city went boom. Christmas. And it was really actually kind of magnificent in a strange way. And I really like this idea that there's a ministry for Yule. And I think it really says something very specifically. And what I think it says is something that I also found in relation to this. Does anybody recognize this? It's a marzipan pig. Yeah, marzipan pig. The habit so I was with a group of my Danish friends, and they said that one of the old school things in Denmark as a habit for Yule is this thing around a marzipan pig, a Yule grease. And this marzipan pig, it is very much the kind of the fatted animal, the Yule kind of symbol. We'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. But this, I think, is really quintessentially Danish in a very particular way. So this is a Yule pig by a confectioner called La Glace, which is a very specific and old confectioner in Copenhagen who still make the old style Yule pigs. In order to win a Yule pig, the Yule pig has to do with the Christmas Eve dinner. You eat a very kind of spiced rice pudding in which a blanched almond, a single blanched almond is placed. And in order to get the Yule pig, you basically get the blanched almond and then you spit it out and you present it. Okay, so in order to win the Yule pig, you have eaten your pudding and you have found your blanched almond, you have spit it out and so forth. And then I was told when I was by my friends that you're not supposed to bite it, you're not supposed to chew it and so forth. So I went to the shop and so forth. So I went to the shop where this very, very lovely woman, older woman, I said, I'm interested in buying one of these Yule pigs. And she said, oh, okay. Thinking, what the heck does this like funny American Englishy woman want to do, you know, with this Yule? Anyway, she went, she got me a Yule pig. And I was purchasing my Yule pig, and I said, I'm really interested in bringing one of these home with me and so forth. So she explained to me to be very careful because they have tiny sticks in the feet and you don't want to choke on the little stick. And she's telling me all these things and she's explaining that. And then I said to her, I hear that you eat your pudding and you have to present the almond. And she said, yes. And I said, and you have to present the almond whole. You can't bite it or chew it or anything. You have to get the almond exactly. And she said, yes, that's right. And then she looked at me and went, and no mercy. So you just don't get the damn pig unless you do this right. And I think this is a really interesting relationship between the ministeriate and the Yule pig, where there really are traditions that actually have to be followed, and they're serious, and they're about trying to understand and usher in this holiday. And although it made me really laugh, and it made her laugh to tell me about it, no mercy. Nevertheless, I did think to myself as I bought 2 pigs, because I was also told by my friends not to buy 2 pigs because there are 2 possible children to win this, and they were like, no, there's only one. They just have to fight. I was like, no, I'm buying 2 pigs. So anyway, I have 2 pigs, so I am taking mercy. But anyway, so the 2 pigs are at my house now, the marzipan pig, alongside, advent calendar candles, and a small Danish flag ornament. And again, I saw many of these, and I was extremely nervous about them because as I was driving up along the Epinal Way, I also noticed a lot of flags flying, and that means something very different. But I checked with my friends before I bought a flag ornament, a national flag ornament, to find that in fact it was a very old habit to decorate in Denmark with a national flag on your tree, and that they were trying to make sure that it was not usurped by a nationalist minority. And so I bought some Danish flags to put on my tree, my Yule pig and my Danish flag. Now, I have twice had the opportunity to spend time during the Yule season in Scandinavia. And the other time came in 2011 when I was able to spend a semester with my husband and my son in Gothenburg. So I spent a season in Sweden as well as in Denmark, which was a slightly different experience and so forth. Same experience in terms of the amusement park. This is Liseberg, if you recognize Gothenburg at all, which is a fantastic amusement park again, which also opens at Christmas. And there is nothing more bracing than being on a roller coaster with a 5-year-old in freezing cold weather. It really does make you unbelievably giddy. It's kind of worth doing just for the experience of it. But it's a really kind of wonderful kind of fantasy land of Christmas. And it is the place in which, there we go. We also saw, and this is a bad photo, I'm sorry, because it really is taken in the dark. But in Gothenburg, there is also the habit of the Yule film, which is a huge projected film, which plays out in this instance against the city's main museum, which has a very lovely kind of archway facade that is really useful for projection and has a huge square. And you can see that there's just tons of people. And after dark, there are 3 different films during the Advent period. And so the first film screens, and then the second film screens a few weeks later, and the third film screens right before the holiday. And literally the town pours out and tons of children and everybody watches them. And they're an Advent habit. So there's a kind of anticipation, but they're again a projected light phenomena. But they are so well attended, and it was so surprising that my other photos didn't even come out because we were literally in like a blowing blizzard snowstorm watching one of these things, and everybody was there to see it. So there's this wonderful kind of experience again of lighting this thing, of Advent, of looking forward to the holiday. And then of course there are the tomten. And if you have a 5-year-old, the tomten becomes very, very, very important. not only do people dress, children sometimes dress as tomten, but the tomten are like the elves. They are like the little Yule elves, but they're very important because tomten are actually domestic spirits. They're hearth spirits or woodland sprites that live in and around people. So they're very much engaged in your individual life. And if you have kept a tidy hearth, the tomten treat you well. And if you have not kept a tidy hearth, the tomten come and cause you trouble. So the tomten are not good or bad in and of themselves. The tomten respond to your goodness and badness. So if you're naughty, then they treat you in one way. And if you're nice, they treat you in another. So they have a very strong relationship to have you been naughty or have you been nice? Whose list are you on and so forth. So the tomten are wonderful figures and very significant to the Swedish Christmas, but as is this habit. And this is Santa Lucia, which many of you will recognize. And you can see that the main Lucia is there with a whole host of young women who are dressed also in the white robe and the red sash, holding the candles. And then this set of figures in the back who are called star boys. And I don't know if they are or are not familiar. But anyway, the Santa Lucia, December 13th, Saint Lucia is a saint who was known for protecting Christians. She came in the darkest time of the year. In the old calendar, December 13th was associated coming up to the solstice. It was a darkening time. And so she had this wreath of candles on her head to light her way as she went to distribute food and so on and so forth. So that's the Saint Lucia in terms of that habit. But the Saint Lucia festival is very particular. Again, it is a festival of lights. It happens at dawn on the 13th, and the children proceed singing and with the lights to ring in the light of the morning, to ring in the dawn. That is, of course, a glamorous one, but that is my son as a star boy at his little Swedish school that he was attending at the time, 5 years old, and that is the traditional dress. Now, most of it's still a very gendered festival. Most of the girls were as Lucias. One or two of the boys were star boys, but they are more associated with the Catholic rituals of Christmas. And then the others were dressed as tomten. So you had a whole group of tomten star boys and Lucias who came singing in the morning into the little school area to stand by the tree and ring in the dawn. And again, a very, very touching, very touching story. I'll never forget the feeling of it. But the key of, and then of course we all stuffed our faces full of saffron buns, which was also really nice. But one of the most interesting things about the Star Boys is that they are very much a marker of epiphany. And we'll talk about that in a moment as well. Now, where does this all come from and why am I interested in this? Well, this all links to my own history too, because I come from a city that also decorates in a very serious way. This is Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and these are old stock photos from the 70s when I was a child. In Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and that is Horn's Tree. Very famously, the decoration of the Horn's department store downtown in Pittsburgh that opens and lights up on Thanksgiving, along with unveiling the store window displays, including the automata and so forth. And this was very much a marker of my childhood, this tree and the notion of these trees, as well as Pittsburgh Plate Glass, which is again one of the big Pittsburgh companies, Pittsburgh Plate Glass, PPG, the PPG Tower, which has its own skating rink and trees, but also indoors, it has a tree like that, all these lighted trees, and a village, which is again, really typical where I grew up, which of course is in Pennsylvania. And if you are a settler European, you are likely to be German. My family were Alsatian of old, as well as Scandinavian, Swedish. So we are right in the middle of this kind of holiday. So these are the embarrassing photos. So I continue to light trees. I continue to light trees like crazy, at one point reaching 600 lights for a 6-foot tree. And I have stepped this back. I have attempted to step this back, but you can still see one of my trees from last year. I light a bit too much, but so too do my family, and they built villages. And this is in 1973, and that was the tree, and that was the beginning of the village. And my dad would spend hours and hours and hours getting all the trains to run. And then we would add and add and add until the village was overflowing with houses. So the villages were very important. For some reason, although my house, we have very few photos of my brother, that's me with my mom. We have very few, we really don't have a lot of family photos. We also don't have them because we had a house fire when I was 12, and a lot of them are gone. But many of them I realized when I was preparing this have us standing in front of these darn trees. For some reason, I have no idea what my brother Mark was doing either with that tree. But anyway, there we are. And we start them young. There's my son, 1.5, at his first tree. So this decorating the tree and hanging around by the tree and being photoed by the tree and having lots of lights on the tree is really deeply, deeply attached as well to me and my house and my family and my son and his growing up and so on and so forth. But it is, as I've been saying, attached very specifically to Yule, obviously. And what Yule celebrates is the solstice. And the solstice is really what this is in many ways about. And as many of you will know, and this is not saying, this is not teaching anybody anything, we all know that one of the most powerful ways in which Christianity spread into different places was to take on the rituals that had already been deeply, deeply ingrained by pagan communities in those spaces. And so Christmas does come but once a year because Christmas celebrates the solstice, and that comes but once a year. And so this is very, very much what the symbols and the structures and the style of it are about. Now, I want to turn again. This is also, and many of you will know this, this is also something that is most particularly of interest to me because the solstice, in thinking this way and around Yule, marks the start of a new year. So you are putting to sleep the quiet time, the darkness of the one year, and welcoming in the light for the next year. And of course, I am also born on the solstice. So December 21st is my birthday. So it literally does mark a year for me. And this year I will be 60. So it will mark a number of these cycles. So I am thinking about time, and I am thinking about the solstice, and I am thinking about Yule, and I am thinking about what it's about. And as we can see what it's about in terms of its science, if we know what its science is about, it is about the tilt of the axis of the Earth. And when in the northern hemisphere, we have the shortest period of daylight and the longest period of night. And you can see, given this diagram, why it is so important to Northern Europeans and to the Norse, because in those parts of the world, you can very much be experiencing a full 24 hours of darkness, a full sense of darkness, as opposed to the kind of slight darkness that we have and complain about a lot here. It is a much more intense experience of the darkness and the light, and the difference between the darkness and the light. But when you actually go to look up solstice and Yule and so on and so forth, you often come across you come across the diagrams around the solstice, but you also come across these sorts of things. You come across these sort of slightly new age versions of old traditions. So you come across the tree, and you come across the lighting during the greatest moment of darkness to protect yourself from the darkness, but to sing in the light. And you also come across, of course, very importantly, a whole range of Neolithic objects and structures that are actually centered around this light. But I want to talk about this a little bit more, because we look at that and we see that, and we see these kind of, it gets a bit new age here and so forth. But these are actually very much global phenomena. So as looking at the light and the darkness, they are not actually just a kind of new age play. Reindeer flying is very much totally built into Sami culture. A whole notion of the idea of reindeer being able to take flight. They are female reindeer, by the way, that take flight. Saturnalia for the Romans, the 7 days of celebrating Saturn, of seed sowing, where the whole world goes upside down. It is a carnival experience, where you're allowed to, the beggar becomes the king and the king becomes the beggar, da da da. The whole notion of carnival becomes really important. Gold rings, candles, feasting, drinking, gifting. The Druids obviously celebrating the light and the darkness, but the Zoroastrians too, with the festival of Yalta, and again, staying awake all night, sharing pomegranate seeds and so forth, to make sure that you would actually tell stories to bring in a new year in the right way. And Dongji is celebrated from the Han Dynasty forward, where you need yang because you are at full yin at this moment. So this whole question of this is not actually something that is new to us, or indeed something that isn't specifically Nordic. And of course, it gets very, its revival, if you like, is very complex and has not always been met with the greatest kind of thrill. So I'm now going to turn to something slightly different. What are we thinking about if we are now thinking about Yule, and if we are now thinking about what these kinds of celebrations might teach us, or what we might do with them? I'm kind of suggesting that a lot of times they turn into these slightly new age images and so forth, and they, in some ways, are not taken as seriously as maybe we might take them, and maybe we might think about them again. So this is Fern Schaefer. She's an eco-feminist artist. This is her winter solstice work from 1985. Yes, she is standing in this icy space. And yes, she is dressed like a pine tree. And it is a slightly awkward image, and it is an awfully literal image. And I take the point, there is a sense in which sometimes what is generated when people try to think of symbols like this and try to step into these symbols is that they step into them in a kind of vacuous sense. However, I want to point out that that image was used by Susie Gablick for a book called The Reenchantment of Art from 1994. And Gablick actually wrote something really interesting as a start of that book, where she wrote, quote, I suspect, the first volume of this came out in 1991, so we're thinking a long time ago, really now for ourselves, 30 years. I suspect we are at the end of something, a hyper-masculinized modern culture whose social products have become increasingly unecological and non-sustainable. She began to talk instead about a reenchantment, a rejecting of mechanistic, rationalist, materialistic stuff, and a return to social relatedness and ecological healing. Quote, what I wish to argue for the remainder of this book is that the rational framework of modern aesthetics has left us with an ontology of objectification, permanence, and egocentricity, which has seriously undermined art's inherent capacity to be communicative and compassionately responsive, or to be seen as part of a process rather than exclusively as a fixed form. Now, that is a rather less laughable, if you like, less silly version than I'm standing here in my pine tree outfit or whatever. That is a rather serious call to thinking about exactly where are we and what is the state of play for us in this particular moment, and what might we learn from thinking about different sorts of understandings of the order of the world and the organizational structures of the world. And ecofeminists signaled this very, very long while ago, and have often been sort of pushed to the side a bit, and is now sort of beginning to have a little bit of a revision. Likewise, a question of time and temporality, and again, a range of feminist projections and discussions about temporality as being deeply and profoundly cyclical, of being more than just teleological, of being more than just mechanistic, but actually something that is about tuning in to the relationships between your body, the earth, the cosmos, and so forth. And you can look back to think about Kristeva's women's time, or you could look more specifically in relation to the planetary movement as someone like Luce Irigaray, who talked about ellipses and eclipses, that the world moves in ellipses and eclipses, and that actually it is really important to protect the eclipses. Not everything needs to have the bright light shone on it. Sometimes you need the shadow. Sometimes you need the shade. Sometimes you need the quiet moments of the downtime of the darkness to allow you to regenerate and replenish. for the light to come. So ellipses and eclipses, reenchantment, reenchantment of art. Reenchantment has also become a really important perspective, and is again having another kind of revival and a really serious set of thoughts around it. And reenchantment again has a very strong lineage in feminist thinking, not least Silvia Federici talking about the reenchantment of the earth being to do with a feminist politics of the commons. Again, things that are notions of shared time, shared temporality, shared space, shared knowledges, shared learning. And also Marina Garces, who talks about new radical enlightenment. And I just cite her for a moment. She says, what kinds of knowledge and what cultural practices do we need to construct, develop, and share to work for a better society throughout the planet? It seems a naive question, she says, but when humanities lose touch with it, they become mere knowledge about texts, of texts about texts, and they die. So what does the humanities, or what do the humanities have to offer us? And what she argues for is a philosophy of the common world. A philosophy of the common world, which, and again, I think is really quite interesting. She talks about a philosophy, this philosophy, in which women, the precariat, and disdained knowledge are all working together, not afraid of taking the roots at ground level, to think together about what nobody can fix alone. What kinds of knowledges, what do we need to understand? Is this just simply a kind of neo-primitivism? Well, Federici and Garces both argue that it's absolutely not a neo-primitivism, but it is a return to think about what knowledges were wiped out, pushed aside, rent asunder, eclipsed, as we raced ahead to assume that we understood an instrumental way of using the planet, an instrumental logic of understanding the way the world operates, rather than one which might talk about how we might attune ourselves as individuals and collectives to being able to work with the planetary movement. And I point to, again, this notion of the Neolithic stone circles, which are now also being kind of thought of as not only like amazing astronomical sort of features that do read time and space and so forth, but also as being memory tools, mnemonics, very complex mnemonics that help people pass on knowledges, memory, and history over incredibly long periods of time. Much like the string figures and the song lines that pervade Australian Indigenous culture and have passed on knowledges for 65,000 continual years, which makes the kind of knowledge that we talk about, the instrumental way of approaching thinking about the planet and the earth, really feel very, very, very new, young, and maybe not lasting at all in some ways. And so we may have seen someone like Fern Schaefer put on a tree, but there have been a range of projects around feminist, eco-feminist art projects that have been precisely to try not simply to go back to some kind of idyllic once upon a time, but to think really seriously about this tuning in. How might we think in the now and in the present and with the tools that we have to hand? And this is Nancy Holt's Sun Tunnels from 73 to 6, which is a really, really fascinating project in which she took waste detritus from pipelines and used them instead as artworks, refashioning them to pick up both the summer and the winter solstice in Utah. This is on a big plot of land in which so twice a year, they perfectly align with the sun, both at the winter solstice and at the summer solstice. But they also project through these drilled holes, they project through the light out over the course of the year, a series of constellations, a series of stars, including, of course, Capricorn. And so there's this fascinating sort of project, which again tries to tune in. It tries to tune in a hyper contemporary in the 70s way. It tries to tune in to thinking about what tools we are using currently in relation to the land, and particularly this question of pipelines in this particular desert-like space. But what else might we do with them, and what else might we learn from them, and how else might we operate with them? And so it's a really interesting sort of position to take. And it leads me to thinking about both these notions of the stars, the constellations. And so here we have Sagittarius, and of course the solstice currently sits in winter solstice currently sits in Sagittarius. It will in thousands of years move to Capricorn, and it usually sits right now at the cusp between Sagittarius and Capricorn. And this is just a very beautiful image, an Iranian image of Sagittarius, again, because people have been mapping the stars around the world in relation to these symbols for a very, very long time. And there's Capricorn for us to look at. Sagittarius also sometimes is considered to have a teapot in it, which I like a lot. But anyway, but that's a personal issue. But I want really to return to this little guy for 1 second as well on the stars, my own personal little Sterngossen. Being led by the stars, thinking about the stars, thinking of a star of Bethlehem, thinking about the notion of what it means to have a star, is a very important idea. He indicates the starman, he indicates epiphany, he indicates the idea of the kings following a star to find themselves in Bethlehem and offer gifts at the birth of Christ in the manger. So the idea is that to follow a particular heavenly phenomena. This, however, is not a phenomena that happens every year, and that's the point. This, however, is an unusual phenomena. And what it actually talks about, I think, and what I think is very interesting about this, is a relationship between two kinds of time. There is the cyclical notion of time. There is the constant of the solstice and of tuning into that. But there is also the time of wonder, the time of an epiphany, an epiphanic moment, a moment that pierces or changes or does something different for us. So there is the tuning to the regular time, and then there is something else. Now, there are lots of theories about this. I'm not going to kind of argue with which one it is, but what was the Star of Bethlehem? There was certainly a heavenly phenomena, and scientists argue this toss right now, whether it might have been a comet or potentially whether it was actually a great conjunction. And of course, we have just seen a great conjunction, which took place on the solstice, the winter solstice in the Northern Hemisphere of 2020. So December 21st of 2020, there was a great conjunction. This is an image of it, and this is my image of it, because I went out to go and look for it. And you could, in fact, see it at certain times of the day. And it could very well have been that the Star of Bethlehem was, in fact, a great conjunction. And there had not been a great conjunction of that ilk since 1200. So it really was a phenomena that you might only see once in your lifetime, quite seriously once in our lifetime. It was a bit of an epiphany. It is a kind of way of turning. And as we start thinking about this, wonder, epiphany, tuning into nature, understanding the cosmos, what kinds of patterns might we start talking about? What kinds of time and space? And I want to suggest that there are times and spaces of hope and different ways of understanding the world. Now, in Copenhagen, when I was taking my Danish lessons, I'm not very good at it, but when I was taking my Danish lessons, I went to the North Campus, and every time I went, I passed the Niels Bohr Institute. Now, I have a kind of a real affection for the Niels Bohr Institute and for Niels Bohr. And it's a very interesting building and so forth, but it sits on, as you can see on it, what is most fascinating about it now is that it actually has a work of art on the front of it. And this is the little description for the work of art. And I want to read a bit of it to you because it was a collaborative work of art made by architects, artists, and the scientists of the Institute who worked on this. And what happens is, as you're wandering along, various lights go off in various kinds of configurations. So you can see two different photos, but it's live. It happens live as you're going and as you're passing. So again, it is about mapping light, mapping light. But in this instance, it is part of the experiment at CERN outside of Geneva. And you are seeing the data from the particle collisions as they happen within the LHC accelerator. The signals reproduced with a broad spectrum of notes and varied intensities, as if the accelerator was some kind of, and this is what makes me smile, as if the accelerator was some kind of gigantic musical instrument. Maybe one can see the work as a kind of visual translation of the music that sounded at the birth of the universe. How much wonder is there in that? That is a remarkable moment of wonder. So that is high level science and wonder at the same time. They are not opposed. There is not a kind of sense of going back to something and just getting rid of everything else, but something that actually needs to think about inflection. And with that notion of inflection, I want to read something to you that I think is really significant, because I'll wrap up by ending up in Norway in a moment again. If you've never listened to or ever watched or heard Martin Luther King Jr. speak, it's worth actually tuning in at some point. And if you've never read any of his work, it's worth listening to or reading some of it. I want to talk about his Nobel lecture, which he gave on December 11th, 1964. And he said in that lecture, "Modern man has brought this whole world to an awe-inspiring threshold of the future. He has reached new and astonishing peaks of scientific success. He has produced machines that think." 1964, he has produced machines that think, "and instruments that peer into the unfathomable ranges of interstellar space. He has built gigantic bridges to span the seas and gargantuan buildings to kiss the skies." Again, Jimi Hendrix will ring out. "His airplanes and spaceships have dwarfed distance, placed time in chains, and carved highways through the stratosphere. This is a dazzling picture of modern man's scientific and technological progress. Yet in spite of these spectacular strides in science and technology, and still unlimited ones yet to come, something basic is missing. There is a sort of poverty of the spirit, which stands in glaring contrast to our scientific and technological abundance. The richer we have become materially, the poorer we have become morally and spiritually. We have learned to fly the air like birds and swim the sea like fish, but we have not yet learned the simple art of living together." He speaks very specifically of the key problems in the world, which he refers to very directly as racial injustice, poverty, and war. He then says in his acceptance speech, "I refuse to accept the cynical notion that nation after nation must spiral down a militaristic stairway into the hell of thermonuclear destruction." And he argues instead for a very, very beautiful and different kind of hopeful future. He says, "So we must fix our vision not merely on the negative expulsion of war, but upon the positive affirmation of peace. We must see that peace represents a sweeter music, a cosmic melody that is far superior to the discords of war. Somehow we must transform the dynamics of world power struggle from the negative nuclear arms race, which no one can win, to a positive contest to harness man's creative genius for the purpose of making peace and prosperity a reality for all the nations in the world. We must turn our imminent cosmic elegy into a psalm of creative fulfillment." And it's here, I think, that we begin to enter into, again, a notion of these kinds of collaborative questions of art and science, and the ways in which we can honor and understand knowledges of the past, long distant knowledges that connected people with the earth and the cosmos, right next to the latest ways that we think about them as somehow having an epiphany for us, a way of wondering. And my favorite artist for this was an artist I knew. She was very old before she ever got to making art, and died in 2005. And I had the opportunity, luckily, to meet her. And she talked about art being everything about pursuing wonder, that this was what it was about, pursuing wonder. And this is Can It Be That the Everlasting Is Ever Changing, from the trilogy Three Environments, as you can see, from 20th Century Dreaming, in which spark chambers, light diodes, circuit boards, etc., are attached to a bed of earth and saplings from Australian eucalyptus trees. It maps three kinds of time. It maps human time, that is both indigenous ways of mapping time. It maps human time as earthly time, and it maps cosmic time. And they interact through three modes of dreaming. Brassel was extraordinary for this kind of work. There she is in 1990 installing this work randomly now and then, which you can see 8 diorite cores suspended from microphone stands attached to the transducers. When you walk, your own resonance and your frequencies, as well as the transducers and the cores, begin to sing. And she talks about it quite specifically as the notion of singing the sound of 1,000,000 years ago as you tune in to the cores. This is now permanently installed in the MCA. It's taken years for this to be kind of recognized. She talked about her work as being techno-scientific poesis, as being some space between in the making and the knowing and the understanding, a space in which we would be able to tune in to these thousands of years and time passed through connections and movement and exchange. But I want to return as I finish to the Norwegian fjords, because you can be connected in Sydney and in Australia and with the scientists working with you and so forth, but you can also be connected exactly where you are, and you don't necessarily have to be moving all the time to do it. And I want to think about this for a very particular reason, because living on a small, this is Trondheim fjord, living on a small area of this, the Orland Peninsula that you have to reach from a boat from Trondheim, was an artist called Hannah Rugen, an amazing and quite fascinating woman artist who worked from the 1930s straight through to 1970, her death in 1972, I believe, and where she specifically worked in textiles production. Now, it's hard to imagine how important textiles is historically to Norway and Norwegian art practices, but it is extremely important, and it's considered to be an extremely high form of work. She and her husband lived in Orland, in this small place. He built her first loom, and she began to work in textiles production that was drawn from very ancient ways of producing textiles. So she did all vegetable dyes. She insisted for the blues. The blue is produced basically by using human urine. And so she insisted that anybody who visited her studio peed in a pot as part of her textile. So this was very hands-on. It was absolutely carbon neutral. It was absolutely in tune. He was very much a recycler. But from this space in Orland, she made some of the most highly political work of Norway's kind of historical production in the period. Here she is made the Ethiopia from 1935 against Mussolini and the Italian fascist move into Ethiopia. Here it's Spain in 38 against Franco. The work that she made in 1935 on the Ethiopia was actually shown in 1937 alongside Picasso's Guernica in the New York World's Fair. So this was hugely publicly seen, really had an audience, and was the direct political comment against fascism, which was very much how she built most of her career while staying in Orland and producing and tuning into this very natural form of production of a textiles process. In the 1950s, after her husband had died and grieving, she began to make probably her biggest and most significant piece of work, and it's called We Are Living on a Star from 1958. It is, of course, it's beautiful. I mean, it's beautiful. That gives you an idea of the scale. That's the only reason I've shown it. You have to understand that these are very, very large, actually. They're incredibly complex. They're woven, hand woven on a loom. They use only the materials that she has extracted from the plants and the dyes and so forth to make them. She made her own string, et cetera, et cetera. So she is an absolutely kind of hands-on textiles artist. And this is, of course, an ode to the whole notion of the human condition being absolutely intrinsically connected. We are not only living on a star, we are stardust. We are completely interconnected to the world in which we live. What is important about this work is that the commission was from the newly built Oslo City Hall. And the Oslo City Hall was sited after the occupation of the Germans of Norway, the tremendous loss of a population of Jewish community members in Norway who were not able to escape transport. Norway was extremely hard hit, but also resistant throughout the war. And the town hall is really dedicated to that resistance. It's sited right next to the Nobel building, and it's where the Nobel lectures are held. So We Are Living on a Star is very much the notion of an attempt to think really critically about how we might re-enchant the world, a world in which we have actually seen quite a lot of trauma, quite a lot of difficulty, but we will not re-enchant it by going away from it or stepping outside of it, but rather by tuning in all the more deeply to its wonders and its patterns and its histories. And with that, I wish you a very happy Yule, a most delightful Christmas if you are celebrating, or whatever other holiday and festivity you choose to celebrate. I hope you do it with a sense of attention and time. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Marsha. I really don't think we could have had a better inaugural Christmas IAS lecture. Thank you so much. This was just fantastic. Curiosity, wonder, fun. Given that Marsha's brief was, could you give us a lecture on something festive? that was absolutely amazing. Thank you so much. I also want to make a couple of further thanks before we proceed with celebrations. Well, first of all, I want to wish a very happy festivities and thank the amazing team, the IAS team, who makes my job the best job at the university. Still remains to be the best job in the university. So Laura, Kieran, Connor, Linda there. Thank you so much. And also our doctoral leaders, Jenny and Will. Jenny and Will, unfortunately, are not here. You're just amazing, and you make IAS what it is, so I'm very lucky to work with you. Also thanks to all our hosts who have hosted fellows over this year. We've had a huge amount. I know that it's a lot of work, which is not in your workload. Dean's in the room, but this is so important for us and for institutional reputation, and also for everything that we do internationally. And finally, I want to thank our board members for stepping down. So Sam, thank you. Martin just walked out, Duncan, and also Weil and Thomas. They've been fantastic. They've supported us since the board has been established a couple of years ago. Some of the best ideas have come from them. We have Ariana, and sorry, Martin isn't stepping down. Why have I completely stepped him down? No, Martin is staying with us. And so is Ariana, who I just joined us, together with 8 new board members who I'm going to officially now announce. I want to know that we had 40 applications for 6 places. As always in IAS spirit, for those of you who've been on our panels, Sam is laughing because she knows what I'm going to say. We were not able to appoint 6. We appointed 8. So now we have 10 advisory board members, which is fantastic. And the applications came from every single school at the university, which again shows the diversity and the kind of the trust that people have in us. So the new academic advisory board is Poppy Color. Mark Deutsch, who is not here, unfortunately, Jade French, Graham Hitchen, CUNG, Liu, Ariana, of course, stays with us, Martin is staying with us, Anna Suzina, and Trulik Verma. And they're fantastic, so please support them. And thank you again for joining us.